Okay, now we're going to talk about the operation of the LF beacon, the Elpas LF beacon. The primary function of this beacon is basically to transmit an LF signal and create a field around the door and exit of a range ranging from, let's say, 30 centimeters all the way out to about 5 meters. So that's the antenna that you see printed here on the PCB. It also has a series of terminals that could be used to monitor and control the door, as well as send information to a third-party controller. So let me turn this around. So these first two terminals are for weakened out, so that you can use this as basically an interface or a reader for a third-party access controller. When you have it set using the configuration dip switches not to use the weaken, but use rather than inputs, then these two become digital inputs. The third terminal could be used either as an input, a supervised input. That means there are 4 discrete levels, open and close, as well as break and short. And it also could be used as an open collector output, depending on what you set the dip switches for. The fourth terminal is for an open collector output fixed. Then the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth terminal is used as an input. This input is supervised, so there are 4 discrete levels. If you do short the input, then that can be used to turn off the LF transmission. So, for example, if you wire this to a door, which is a door magnet, a reed switch, which is normally closed, so when the door is closed, the LF doesn't transmit. Only when the door opens, the LF will begin to transmit if you wire it to that terminal. Then you've got ground. Now this ground is the common ground that will be used for all the others, so you may need, if you're using a lot of these terminals, then you may need a separate connector to splice out that ground. And then the last one is the synchronization. That's used to synchronize between beacons if you're using the master-slave or primary-secondary configuration, which we will discuss again in a moment. So I'm going to connect my network cable, which I neglected to mention. This, of course, is the RJ12, where you're going to get your data and your power. Okay, so let's just, hello. Right, so now it's on. And let's flip it over and see what we got on this side. So here is where you set your LF ID using dip switches. I peeled off there's a coating. You don't have to peel it off. You can push the switches without just using a screwdriver, but I peeled them off. It's easier to switch the switches. All the switches are on, so you can set your ID by simply pushing down certain switches. Again, this is a digital or a hex value here. So your numbers, the least significant is the 8th switch and the most significant is the 1, etc. You can see examples in the user guide. These terminals here are used for configuration. You've got a little table here explaining the function of each of these dip switches. This top one here is if that optional terminal here, the one that could be either in or out, this third one, if it is going to function as input or output, the default it's on, so the default, I'm sorry, my mistake. This first one is primary or secondary, and this is now configured to be a primary. So if you want to create a larger field with multiple beacons, then you would set the first one to primary and the second one to secondary, or the additional to secondaries. The second switch here determines what the function of this in or out terminal is. The third switch determines whether these whether this device will send out weakened messages or use these two terminals as a digital input. And the last is AB. The AB determines whether the whether the secondary will transmit in phase or out of phase of the primary. And this you will need to set based on how you install the beacon. So if you have two beacons, one at either side of the door, then you're going to leave it as A. But if you're opposite each other, let's say you have a corridor and you want to have one beacon opposite the other, then the primary will be left as A, but the secondary you want to set to B, and then they'll be out of phase and you'll avoid interference issues that occur when they face each other. To set the range, you use this little button, and every 2 clicks you can see increases the number of LEDs that are lit. The LEDs, there are 8 LEDs, and they indicate the range, the current range of the beacon. So this is the lowest range, and then by clicking up, and 8 is the maximum range. Okay, so that is pretty much what you've got here. Of course, the tamper on the front and the back, and you'd set your tamper rules up in your software. Most important thing about mounting these, do not mount them on metallic surfaces, okay? They must be separate from and isolated from metallic surfaces as a minimum of 20 centimeters or so from these conduits, etc. They have the range of this device actually is different when you're perpendicular than when you're parallel. So when you're facing the device, you can get a range of up to about 5 meters, but from the side, the maximum range will be more like 3 meters. Okay, keep that in mind. They're very powerful, and have a look at the user guide for safety instructions. When used at maximum power, there's a limit to how much time you want to sit in front of this over the period of a day. So that's listed in the user guide. Yep, that's it for now. Contact your tech support if you have any additional questions. Thank you.